What's going on, guys? This is Rob. If you guys enjoy my content, make sure you hit the subscribe button and make sure you hit that little bell so you never miss out on my sexy voice. Okay, so we're picking up with Jonathan Hickman's Ultimates, the Ultimate Avengers from the Ultimate Universe. And of course, this is before Secret Wars 2015, so normally we wouldn't cover this, but we're going to go back through and we're going to I guess we're going to continue remastering Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers now that we're getting closer to the release of Avengers 4. And because of that, we kind of have to cover this. So the reason why is because what this does is it sets the stage for what goes on with regards to the Ultimate Universe during the events of the collapse of the multiverse, which is to say once you get into the immediate lead up to Secret Wars 2015. Now, the idea behind this is kind of an important thing. This comes out of the events of Ultimatum and Ultimate Fallout. Ultimatum, of course, was a story we covered where you learn the origin of mutants in the Ultimate Universe and Magneto floods the world and different things like that. But Ultimate Fallout was kind of the big thing that this came out of. And Ultimate Fallout was kind of Marvel's way of sort of reshuffling the Ultimate Universe yet again, right? Because in 2000, the Ultimate Universe was launched. It was really, really popular for some number of years. And then just by virtue of what was really just kind of poor writing on a lot of the titles outside of Spider-Man, it just kind of began to flounder. And so then once you got into the mid 2000s, going into 2011, Marvel kind of reworked the whole thing. And so where Ultimate Fallout basically dealt with the aftermath of the death of Ultimate Spider-Man, what Marvel did is they kind of reworked Fantastic Four, they reworked X-Men, they reworked the Ultimates in order to kind of push forward with the stories. And so what this does is this initially picks up with a guy that we only know as the Maker. Now, for those of you guys who are familiar with him, please do not spoil it down below. But it is kind of a cool concept here because what he's done here is formed something called the Children of Tomorrow. Now, we will get an explanation on what that is here in a second, but for right now, just kind of let that sit in the back of your heads. But what's happened is the Maker has formed something called the City. And it's just this giant citadel that just sort of exists out there in northern Germany. And so again, nobody really considers it to be much of a threat because it's just kind of a thing that's there and no one really knows about it. And so what it does is it shifts over to S.H.I.E.L.D. proper. Now, when it comes to the Ultimate Universe in Marvel Comics, this is what the Marvel Cinematic Universe is based off of. And the reason why I say this was because, well, one, because it is based off of it, and two, because of the fact that the Ultimate Universe was designed to be more grounded. What would it look like if Marvel Comics characters as we knew them existed in the real world? And so what's going on here is there are a handful of events that are taking place, all of which are being monitored by S.H.I.E.L.D. In the Ultimate Universe, S.H.I.E.L.D. had a far more hands-on approach than they did in the main Marvel Universe, and, with regards to how they dealt with conflicts and monitoring everything and all that kind of good stuff. And of course, they're based out of the Triskelion, which you guys will recognize from the MCU, from Captain America, the Winter Soldier. But what's happened here is that the EDI, the European Defense Initiative, is responding to what's basically kind of craziness going on in Asgard. And there's a couple things that we have to explain here. When it comes to Asgard in the Ultimate Universe, all we really knew about it was the old Thor comics or I guess the old Ultimate Thor comics, which used to say Asgard was a mythological place that existed at some point along the line. And then eventually Thor was cast out of Asgard and he was sent to Earth. Now, at the time, Marvel kind of toyed with the idea on whether Thor was actually Thor or if he was just a crazy guy who believed he was Thor. And for a long time, we didn't really know. Eventually, Marvel cleared that up and said he is actually Odin's son, reborn in human form. But at the time, Asgard was essentially destroyed. Now, all that really kind of coalescing came together when Asgard was recreated after the return of Odin, and then it was sent to Earth. So it's very similar with regards to the aftermath of Civil War in the main Marvel Universe when Odin returns to life and then resurrects, Asgard, or I guess really returns Asgard in Broxton, Oklahoma. The difference here is that the Asgardians are very just wild folk, is really what they are. They party and they get into all kinds of crazy things, but the European Defense Initiative is basically Europe's version of the Ultimates. But the European Defense Initiative is responding, of course, to everything going on in Asgard, and Thor is sent by Nick Fury to go check everything out as well. The problem with this is that at the same time this is all going on, there's Iron Man responding to a threat. So again, there's a lot of different things happening in the world as it stands now. Now, a lot of this, again, coming out of Ultimatum, the fact that the world was almost destroyed, really led to a heightened sense of security. Now, when the EDI shows up to Asgard in order to just kind of be you guys got to calm down, stop being so rowdy, stop being so crazy, Thor actually offers Jamie Braddock a drink. And when Jamie Braddock pours it out, then as Nick Fury's watching all this unfold, he's okay, so things are about to pop off. And they do. You end up having this massive fight that breaks out between the European Defense Initiative and the Asgardians. At the same time that's going on, you've got Iron Man responding to what's basically a ghost ship on a collision course, and Iron Man, of course, is responding and trying to get it all sorted out, trying to figure out what's going on. The issue with this is that when he gets on board that ship, and as he's going through and investigating it, when he tries to take it down, he ends up realizing the ship has a nuclear bomb on board, a thermonuclear device, which detonates and seemingly seems to kill Iron Man in the process. Now, of course, this is a drone that he has out there, but remember, he's mentally linked to it. So it's one of those things where it's Iron Man through, or I guess Tony Stark through a mental link, is kind of blown up by a nuclear nuclear device. Now, with Jamie Braddock and with Thor and the other members of the EDI, basically Captain Britain, Captain Italy, Captain France, with them responding to what this giant city that's sitting out there, they're immediately yanked in, and then from there it's just kind of like, okay, what do we do? Because what's going on here is that all signals have essentially been lost, where you have like all these different events that are going on that are being monitored by S.H.I.E.L.D. At the same time, they all go down. And so S.H.I.E.L.D. is essentially flying blind. They have no idea what's going on in all these various missions that they have taking place all across the world. And so what we end up doing is kind of shifting back for a second and focusing on the nature of this city. Now, this city houses a group called the Children of Tomorrow. And the idea is that inside this city, once the walls went up, that basically time started passing at an accelerated rate. Well, we're not really given like a time frame here. What we're told is that 900 years have basically passed inside this city. And so initially it started out as people who were just trying to look to make the world a better place, or at least that was the auspices they were operating under. As time began to progress and as they began to evolve, they began to shift away from traditional means of procreation and started like evolving people, started creating human beings. As that began to progress, suddenly names started to go away. It stopped being like Emma the Fourth, it stopped being John the Third, it started turning into things like the sword, the knife. Names began to go away, and they started achieving this kind of hyper-accelerated rate of evolution, becoming a much better version of themselves. Now, while all that was going on, they started achieving higher levels of technology, better understanding of like the human genome, basically kind of becoming like perfect beings. But again, like while that's going on, because that took such a short amount of time to happen, when Jamie Braddock and company are pulled inside the city, they're met with these hyper-evolved beings. And as they go through and start analyzing Jamie Braddock and all of them, they start determining their weaknesses, things that are wrong with them, so on and so forth, and trying to find a way to kind of perfect them, quote unquote. And so with that happening, again, it's really kind of like pandemonium and it's panic and it's trying to figure out what's going on. So of course, Thor basically kind of breaks into the whole place, or at least seems to break in. They start analyzing him and then really come to the conclusion that he's basically like a god of sorts. Now, of course, Iron Man also recovers from this thermonuclear device, albeit his mind is totally addled, and in return actually dons the Iron Man suit and then goes to where Nick Fury tells him to, which is exactly where this city is. And so it's kind of all the Ultimates descending on this one particular area. Now, what we actually end up doing here is kind of picking up with the Maker and picking up with City proper. And what I mean by that is that where this was just a giant dome that was allowed to kind of evolve on its own, what it did is it evolved in basically an artificial intelligence. Now, the artificial intelligence does function according to the whims and wants of the Maker, but it is capable of functioning independently. The difference here is that the Maker is kind of like the god of the city itself. And so where Thor is being analyzed by one of the researchers, one of the scientists, and they don't really know what Thor is, the Maker looks on it and says, I know exactly who that is. That's Thor. He's a legitimate god. He's an Asgardian. We have to find a way to basically, access him or capture him or figure out what we can do here. And so what ends up happening is the researcher within the city begins to look at Odin's son and realize that he's not just powerful in and of himself, that he's actually channeling energy coming from Odin and energy coming from the tree of Yggdrasil. And so the response is, we can drain those sources of energy and we can enhance ourselves. And so they immediately take to Asgard proper with the intention of attacking the place. While the Asgardians are, do have heightened abilities and so on and so forth, they're also destroyed by the various children who were here. They of course access Odin. They begin draining Odin of his own energy, his life force, essentially the Odin force. At the same time, they drain the tree of Yggdrasil of all its energy. And what this does is it leaves Thor powerless. He's got no abilities whatsoever. Now, this is where things really kind of require a bit of an explanation here. Because of the fact that Odin's son, when he originally appeared in the Ultimate Universe, because Odin was basically dead, because Asgard was destroyed, he had no real source of energy. Instead, what he got was this kind of bio-enhanced suit that was given to him by the EDI, which in turn he would use to function as Thor. And that's why you saw him with the 6 lights on his chest and a hammer that basically looked like Stormbreaker to a degree that Beta Ray Bill uses. Once Asgard came back and once Odin came back, then we got the Ultimate Universe version of Thor as we knew him. Now, with Thor basically being powerless, what Iron Man had done was bring back the old Thor suit from the beginning of the Ultimate Universe and then modify it with a new set of abilities, one of which we'll actually see later on here in this story. But with that happening, Thor just kind of redons the outfit and then in turn goes forward. The issue with this is that the city as it exists has actually been expanding by 1 kilometer per hour and it's basically kind of spread all throughout a lot of the northern German area. City after city after city and territory after territory is basically being conquered by the city and being taken over in its entirety. In response to this, you have S.H.I.E.L.D. that basically launches an attack against the city and nothing works. Not only does nothing work, the city launches its own defenses and actually starts crushing S.H.I.E.L.D. It's essentially the end times. But then you have Nick Fury who calls for the use of nuclear weapons. Now, this is kind of designed to show us how desperate things are. The use of nukes and really even within the confines of the Ultimate Universe, as grounded as it is one of those things where the end times are upon us. Because you're talking about obliterating the entirety of a city and then an uninhabitable area that surrounds it, the carrying of radiation, and the idea that for some period of time, no one could live there until the radiation basically disperses universes. How long that would be, we don't fully know. The issue with this is that when the nukes are launched, they're immediately contained by the children of tomorrow. They're literally prepared for it. And so it's kind of a crazy scenario because what Nick Fury is required to do is basically sound the general retreat. The problem with this is they cannot get out in time. The forces of the children of tomorrow are about to usurp them. And so that's when one of the powers of Thor's new suit manifests, when he basically teleports them all away. The problem with this is that for Thor, the destruction of Asgard came from the children of tomorrow, and it's a personal vendetta, is really all this is. And so in this moment, he basically tells Iron Man, you're a great warrior, you're a great friend, that kind of thing, and then teleports away. And it's kind of a crazy scenario because it's almost kind of fast-tracking the relationship between Thor and various other characters. And that's one of the things I want you guys to keep in the back of your head, is because when it comes to Jonathan Hickman writing styles, what he does is he focuses a lot on character development, but he does it in a reasonable way. Now with this, with Ultimates, he's kind of building on what's already been there. It's one of those interesting little scenarios here. And so with Thor basically teleporting away, arriving in the city proper, when he gets there, the AI realizes Thor's there, but instead of like obliterating him in his entirety, they kind of allow him to enter. It's really kind of seeing like, I wonder what's going to happen here. Now, this is kind of a funny scenario because what this does is it shows how hopelessly outmatched Thor is. If the Maker and the AI were legitimately concerned that Thor could actually destroy the entire city itself, they wouldn't have let him in. But the fact that they let him in shows that Thor's no real credible threat to them. Now, keep in mind, Thor is vastly depowered right now in relation to how he was when he had his hammer. He was channeled by the power of Odin and the Yggdrasil tree. So again, he's a much weaker version of himself. But when he gets in there, he ends up meeting with a researcher of sorts, or at least a nurse, who's kind of helping these kids, helping to grow these children here and so on and so forth. Again, she refers to herself as the fourth nurse. So she doesn't actually have a name. That's really all it is. Like Thor gets here and she's like, well, the people you're looking for are that way. So head over that direction. And of course, she sends him over to Jamie. He ends up freeing Jamie. And that's when he's met with the Maker. And it's kind of a big thing here because in this moment, what ends up happening is the Maker basically sits down and starts talking to Thor. And he basically says, look, like you have a mission here. Like you're here for a goal. That's fine. But like, you're not going to win. And when the question is asked why, the Maker says, first knife, show him how hopelessly outmatched he is. And the first knife literally runs circles around Thor. I mean, overpowers him in every way. By the time Thor has thrown like one shot, the knife has hit him like 3 or 4 times. So it's like there's no real competition here for Thor. Thor swings once, and in the time it takes for him to do a 180-degree rotation of his hammer, like he's essentially defeated, just kind of falls to the ground, and that's the end of that. And the Maker keeps telling the knife, just keep punishing him. Just keep punishing him until he realizes what's going on. And so the Maker like literally tells Thor, like, I want you to know who I am. He shows Thor's face, and then he says, your message is to go forward. Tell S.H.I.E.L.D., tell humanity, their time is up. What I've done is I've built a city that will expand out. It's stopped expanding for right now. I'm giving you guys a general chance to come to terms with what's going to happen to your world. But once we begin expanding, there's nothing you're going to be able to do to stop us. And we're essentially going to end all things. Like we're going to take over the entirety of the world. We're going to eliminate humanity in its quote unquote impure form right now. And we're in turn going to replace it with something better. And that's kind of the crazy thing, is because with all this going on, Thor is forced to accept the fact that he's that outmatched. One soldier from the city was enough to totally overpower Thor. What happens when like the entire forces of the city are sent forward? That's the other thing, is because you're talking about the city itself expanding outward. When Jamie Braddock was captured, what that did is it revealed that not only are they growing children at a hyper accelerated rate, what they're also doing is they're taking those individuals who were captured and they're modifying their genetic material. They're perfecting them. And so what they're basically doing is taking an army, or making an army out of those who've been conquered and turning them into soldiers, and then they're going to send them forward. So literally it's a weapon manufacturing citadel that's designed to literally conquer Earth. And so not only that, Thor comes to grips with like the full totality of what it means with the city's denizens when he sits down and he talks to Nick Fury. And he tells Nick Fury everything that happened, and Nick asks, is there anything else? And Thor responds by saying, yes, there's one more thing. The person who's leading the city, the Maker himself, is Reed Richards. And that's the crazy thing here, is because we basically end up finding out this is Ultimate Reed. Now, this is when we start getting into an explanation on what's been going on here and how Reed got to this point. So the way that this played out was when the Ultimate Fantastic Four first popped up, it was just a retelling of the Fantastic Four, and that was really it. All that came to a head during the events of Ultimatum and the events of Ultimate Fallout and some of the stories that came after. And the way this played out was that when Susan Storm was potentially going to die, that Reed Richards chose to protect the world instead of her. And what this did is it created a rift between the two, and Susan Storm turned her back on Reed. And so where the idea behind that was that Reed was going to be written out, he was basically going to be eliminated, Jonathan Hickman used that as a means to bring him back and to basically say that Reed is now essentially a villain, and he's on like a mission to basically perfect the world by eliminating humanity in its impure form, and then in turn trying to create a purified version of itself. Essentially, Reed has kind of become a narcissist and a megalomaniac by believing he's the perfect being and trying to remake everybody in his image. It's pretty awesome. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.